of the Irish Global Health Network, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome you back to the second day of our incredible conference. What a day we had yesterday. It was amazing to all be together, nearly 200 people together in Dublin. It was amazing. I can still feel the energy this morning, and I know many of you who are here online were with us yesterday. We're back to our Zoom personas today, but yesterday we were absolutely out in full in our personal capacities. It was absolutely wonderful. We wanted to start this morning, if that's okay, to just start with Dr. Khalifa is going to, the chair of the Irish Global Health Network is going to welcome us to the conference. Dr. Khalifa is an associate professor and the director of public health program at the University of Birmingham. He's based in Dubai. And as I said, he's the current chair of the board of the Irish Global Health Network. So let's hear from Dr. Khalifa, and then I'll come back with more people joining.
We have faced a significant number of health challenges over the past number of years, putting health systems around the world under unprecedented stress and widened the inequality gap. Structures and processes which were created to address inequality in global health have created more inequality. Organizations in high-income countries often set the priorities in global health. Institutions in high-income countries still have the governance and financial power in global health. Shifting the power in global health to have a global balance is an impossible goal without fundamentally changing the structures within which we currently operate. My name is Dr. Khalifa Musharraf, and an associate professor in public health at University of Birmingham, Dubai, and the chair of the board of directors of the Irish Global Health Network. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the second day of our conference this year, Global Imbalance and Social Inclusion. Yesterday, we had a wonderful day. We had a great discussions, sharing of research findings, evaluation of programs and projects, policy lessons from the field, and other forms of systematic learning. It was clear from the discussion yesterday that many health issues cross borders, and we must question how sustainable and equitable solutions can be provided, how to build resilience to shocks and stresses that impact on our health systems, and how to strengthen health systems and make healthcare accessible and equitable for all, how to empower and engage communities, and how to support health workers to achieve the health for all goals. Today, we will have a very rich program. Researchers, academics, and those working in the field will discuss global imbalance and social inclusion. Discussions will evolve around leaderships in global health, leadership in politics, public life, and the workplace, and women in leadership. We will also discuss the imbalances that exist across the health sector in all countries and their consequences for the health of populations, highlighting lessons learned about inclusion, equity, and empowerment, and many other issues that we will be discussing today. It gives me a sense of hope and satisfaction to see all of you gathered here virtually. And I would like to conclude by thanking you for your presence here today. And I would like also to thank the sponsors, partners, and members of the Irish Global Health Network. I wish you all a pleasant learning experience, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khalifa, and thank you for being such an amazing chair of the Irish Global Health Network. And we really, really appreciate your leadership and your vision. So have we got a day for you today? What an amazing day. I know we've been asked to turn off our cameras, but just for this moment, if everybody would like to turn on their camera, just so we gather together. I think I'm too attached to us all being together since we were together in person yesterday. And if you can, just, choose the gallery view and you can take a look at everybody who is joining us, just so that we continue the connection that we started yesterday. And welcome everybody. How wonderful to see you all. How wonderful the energy is. Thank you again so much for everybody's participation yesterday. And what a day it was. Just the couple of announcements. It's of course being recorded, so that people can watch the sessions afterwards. If you have a problem with recording, just take your video off, and that will be fine. Anyone has any questions? We're using a Zoom meeting, so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to pick them up and make it as engaging as we possibly can. There's an evaluation that from yesterday, and there will be one today, but we're going to put it in the chat now. So if you're still high on the energy of yesterday and you have things to let us know, please fill in the evaluation now. It would be fabulous, and we'll keep posting that all the way through the day. We really, really appreciate that evaluation. It's important to us. We encourage you to share messages. I just had a glimpse yesterday. We didn't finish till very late last night, but I had a glimpse at Twitter and social media, and it's incredible, the stories and the things that are being shared on social media. So please keep up the sharing today. You can see that we have hashtags. They're going into the chat for you there. Please use them. And just before we start, where are people joining from? We'd love to see, just, welcome just to use the chat and to put in, where are you joining from? Where are you joining from? Are we all over the country in Ireland? Are we outside of the country? Where are we joining from? Look at this. Isn't this incredible? So yes, we've got Jordan, Paula, you're welcome. You were with us yesterday. Thank you for your patience yesterday. And might I say, everybody who was online yesterday, thank you for your patience as we learned, we learned some lessons about hybrid conferences. Wonderful. Dublin, Tatiana is with us from Belgrade in Serbia. Donegal, fabulous spread across the country. Limerick, wonderful. Dublin, Bangladesh, you're welcome, Tejin. Fantastic. As one of the things I said on the closing yesterday was, it was an incredible global community that gathered yesterday. When I looked into the audience in our first session yesterday, it was looking into a sea of diversity and the global community that we really are. Welcome, Flori from Burkina Faso, from Burundi. Amazing. Copenhagen. So there are some advantages to Zoom and being able to be online. Good. As you know, this conference is about inclusion, so fabulous that we're able to see everybody and welcome everybody from all over the world. So without further ado, we are going to jump into our first session. I know I'm really excited for this session. I know you will be too. So I'm going to hand over to the chairs of this session and just introduce you to two amazing women chairs. We have first Anne Holmes. Welcome, Anne. She's the Health Policy Co-Lead in the Department of Foreign Affairs Africa Division. Her recent assignments overseas include Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Ireland in Malawi and Deputy Head of Cooperation at the Embassy of Ireland in Ethiopia. Currently, Anne is the lead for health crisis preparedness and response, sexual reproductive health and rights, domestic partnerships, including with the HSC, RCSI, and indeed IGHN. So Anne is our first chair, and she is absolutely ably supported by Dr. Ciara Conlan, wonderful Ciara, who obtained her bachelor's degree in medicine at the University of Galway in Ireland in 2016. Since then, she has worked mainly in clinical infectious diseases and virology, including spending 6 months in rural Malawi. She is the co-founder and driving force between Access to Medicines Ireland and also more recently Doctors for Vaccine Equity, who've been leading groups in Ireland calling for equitable access to global medicines, access to medicines and COVID-19 vaccines. So over to you, Anne and Ciara.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Greetings from a very wet, grey, autumnal, but quite lovely and cosy Limerick here this morning. You're all very welcome from all over the country and from all over the various locations of our lovely globe here this morning. As Nadine has said, my name is Anne Holmes. I work in the Department of Foreign Affairs on the Global Health team, and together with Ciara, we have been invited by the IGHN to be your co-chairs this morning, and we're very pleased to be part of this keynote session, which I think we're all terribly excited about and really looking forward to it. Not because it brings not just one but two very well known, very impressive and very persuasive speakers from within the domestic and the international, or the global health community rather. Both of them are leaders in their own right. Both are known advocates for equality and inclusion in terms of access to healthcare, to medicines, to technology. And equally, they are advocates for more representative, inclusive and just decision-making around how our domestic and our global health system is designed, financed and governed. So we do actually have an awful lot of ground to cover, or we really do want to be hearing from Dr. Ryan and from Robbie. We have less than 45 minutes, so I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Ciara in just a quick second, but I just want to kind of talk everyone through the format of what we're going to follow this morning. We've been asked by the chairs to structure it in such a way as it is as much a conversation as we possibly can, so that it is as inclusive as possible. So the plan is that Robbie will go first from the Access to Medicines Initiative. He'll share some thoughts, or he'll give us some of his opinions and his reflections. And then immediately he'll be followed by Dr. Mike, who will reflect on some of the points that Robbie has made, and we'll have a conversation with Dr. Mike. We also want to try, in the time we have available, to make this as inclusive as possible. So we're going to try and solicit or elicit questions from you, our rapidly growing audience. We're now up to 64 from all over the planet. So we're going to keep an eye on the chat as well. So if people have questions that they would like to pose, or points that they would like to make in the time, towards the end of the session, we'd really strongly encourage you to put them in brief in the chat, along with your name and the organisation or the community that you represent, if not yourself. And we'll keep an eye on those. If other colleagues who are on the call have points or have questions that have already been asked, we'd ask you to maybe just second or put a reaction on the other ones. And then those questions that seem to be the ones that are generating the most amount of interest and attention, we will invite one or two of the participants to pose those directly to our two very wonderful speakers. And on that note, Ciara, can I hand over to you and you can introduce our two speakers this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I'm so excited to introduce our two speakers for this session. For me, they've really displayed the conference themes of inclusiveness and representation in their leadership style, both during and before the COVID-19 pandemic. So Dr. Mike Ryan probably needs no introduction. He's the Executive Director of the World Health Emergencies Programme. He's been at the forefront of managing acute risks to global health for nearly 25 years, having first joined the WHO in 1996. He's worked in conflict-affected countries and led many responses to high-impact epidemics. He's a founding member of the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, which has aided the response to hundreds of outbreaks around the world. He holds a master's in public health from UCD and specialist training in communicable disease control at the Health Protection Agency in London and through the European Programme for Intervention Epidemiology Training. Our other speaker is Robbie Lawlor, our activist and academic. So Robbie became active within the HIV community since his diagnosis in 2012. He's a member of the European AIDS Treatment Group, and he's a co-founder of Access to Medicines Ireland. Robbie is currently a PhD candidate at DCU, and he has a particular interest in grassroots activism and the Access to Medicines movement in Eastern Europe. So his research is exploring HIV and hepatitis C treatment activism in Ukraine. So I'm going to bring Robbie in now to present about what the session themes mean to him of leadership, representation and inclusion, particularly when it comes to areas like pandemics and preparedness. So go ahead, Robbie.
Thanks so much, Ciara. So nice to be introduced by my really good friend in the Access movement. Firstly, I'd like to thank all the Irish Global Health Network and all conference partners for asking me to be one of the keynote speakers today on what looks to be really an exciting and illuminating day. When I was racking my brain about what I was going to talk about today, I thought it was important to talk about a lot of conversations that I'm currently having with a lot of my friends and family, and I'm sure everyone in this room has too. But one that really strikes me is one that I recently had with my sister. She just gave birth to these beautiful twins, little Mia and Evan. And a few weeks ago when I went to see them, I had these two little chemical reactions and flesh in my arms and the crook of each of my arms. And the feelings of awe quickly went to feelings of dread, because when we were in the sitting room, in the back, Sky News was on, and what we saw was the devastation that was happening in Pakistan. The land surface of the size of the UK was underwater due to climate change. It was submerged in the water, doing irreparable damage to lives and livelihoods through Pakistan. So this sparked off a really grim conversation / rant that I had with my sister. And it went something like this. It's a bit one-sided, it's all on me. So I was like, Ciara, my sister, do you know that by 2050, our global population is projected to increase to 9.8 billion people? That is just 28 years away. It's just one generation jump from little Mia and Evan. And from a climate crisis perspective, as temperatures continue to rise, as we continue to see more extreme weather conditions, as coastal areas submerge underwater, as month-long droughts continue to result in famines, we are going to see mass migration and mobilization on a scale that's unimaginable even to now. And from experience, what we see is mass migration leads to the rise of far-right politics, to the rise of populism, to the rise of nationalism, and threats to our very democracy. And have any of you here ever seen a far-right leader championing the environment, or human rights, or global solidarity? The answer is no. What it leads to is more political short-termism. It leads to continued heightened political and global geopolitical conflict. And this dystopian story goes on and on and on. And I'm not saying this to be hyperbolic. This is a very real possibility and is even the reality for many people right now around the world. In May 2022, the United Nations published its Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, which gave a very grim verdict. It states that our world is experiencing an accelerated trend of natural disasters, including pandemics and economic crises. The report also states that the continuation of business as usual and a failure to invoke drastic policy changes means that human civilization is moving towards collapse. So let me just repeat that again. Without a failure to invoke drastic policy change means that human civilization is moving towards collapse. So my sister at this stage is horrified. And maybe not the best time to bring up existential dread when I'm just with our new twins. But I twist the knife in just a little bit more. I tell my sister about our global health architecture, which is a very big cog in a very dysfunctional machine. In particular, I'm going to look through my lens of access to medicines. So recently, around last year, in an open letter to the World Trade Organization, Tendai Ichumi, the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, stated that systemic racism or racial discrimination is embedded within our transnational legal, economic, and political structures, including the intellectual property regime. For COVID, she called upon states to reject half measures and weak compromises, and they did not listen to her. Wealthy countries did not listen to her. And as we see all heard from yesterday, the impacts that have done around the world because we have not listened. So let me give you a few examples of how racism and corporate interests are embedded within our global health architecture. So in high-income countries, we have normalized that I am on my 6th option of HIV treatment. And I could probably go on to my 7th if I needed it. This is treatment that keeps me alive and stops me from passing it on to my partner. All these options is a pipe dream for my friends in the global south. But what's more, in terms of intellectual property, the African Union estimated that 9 million people died needlessly of AIDS between 1996 and 2006. Because pharma companies would not allow generic production or the selling of generic, cheaper medicines, HIV medicines, to sub-Saharan Africa. And AIDS is a horrible, awful way to die. 9 million people. In high-income countries, we have prioritized that I got my 4th COVID shot and will probably get my 5th COVID shot soon. This is a pipe dream for so many people in low and middle-income countries. In a recent study by The Economist and the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, they estimated that 10.5 million kids were orphaned due to COVID, with the majority of those kids orphaned in the African and Southeast Asian regions. In high-income countries, we have normalized that I have my 2nd monkeypox vaccine, while not a single vaccine has been sent to countries where monkeypox has been endemic for the past 50 years, namely Nigeria and the Congo. And due to our slow response, our very slow response to the monkeypox outbreaks, mainly due to our reliance on bilateral deals during global health emergencies, that means one pharma company talking to another pharma company, rather than this global collaborative effort. Experts in America and the CDC are now saying that monkeypox is most likely going to remain endemic and spread indefinitely, albeit maybe more slowly. But with monkeypox, unlike other pandemics, we already had vaccines. We already had diagnostics. We already had TPOXX, the therapeutic, and we still failed miserably. And when we often talk about access to medicines, we always talk about it normally in relation to pandemics, but we must ask ourselves questions like, why are there 1.3 million adults in the US still rationing insulin in the richest country in the world? We must ask ourselves, why do women in Ireland have access to Herceptin for breast cancer, but not women in Malawi? I could literally spend all day going through these examples. So around this time of discussion with my friends and family, normally they kick me out of the door, they shut the door and they never want to see me again. And I understand why. They always say to me, Robbie, we understand there's so much happening in the world, but we don't know what to do. They feel helpless. They know that business as usual isn't sustainable, but we never told them how to change the business. And I think that is a fundamental failure of global health leaders, but also an opportunity. Because as global health leaders, we never really gave people a reimagined future, one where equity, human rights, and the health of our earth is at the heart of our governance, trade, and health structures. We all may think, well, we gave them the SDGs, but did we really give them a roadmap to achieve the SDGs? Really? So let me give you an example of what I mean. Leaving no one behind is a core maxim of the SDGs. We've all heard that and we've all incorporated that into our work. However, it is well documented in the literature and from what we've seen that scarcity is a core tenet of the pharmaceutical business model. And we've seen it play out with COVID-19, we've seen it play out with monkeypox. Not having enough vaccines or treatment to supply the world is a business model. Pricing medicines out of the reach of millions of people is a business model. Leaving people behind is a business model. So how the hell can we, in global health, reconcile and pat ourselves on the back for this maxim of leaving no one behind, but upholding strongly the trade rules which celebrates greed? How serious are we really being? How radical are we? So this comes my rallying cry, and I know I'm speaking a lot and we all want to hear from Dr. Mike Ryan, but I really hope that this is important. It's super, super important in the world we live in right now. We need to be more radical in global health. Otherwise, we're going to continue to fail. Global health leaders have done some incredible stuff that is undeniable, is a testament to all the great work that Dr. Mike Ryan has done and everyone on this call. But if we're truly serious about leaving no one behind, we have to be more radical. We have to adapt to our changing environment, to all our new challenges, because our current systems are not fit for purpose. So what do I mean by radical? I mean we must fundamentally try to change the nature of these broken systems. So here's the hard bit, right? Because oftentimes those of us who seek reformational change to fundamentally broken systems are deemed radicals, and by association, idealists, and by association, naive. We are often called people, as said, who just don't understand the world or the market, and is often used as a slur. And I am telling you today, we need to reclaim radical and be empowered by it. We need to wear it as a badge of honor, because the true naive people at the table are people who think business as usual is sustainable, or that slow incremental change when our world is burning is the best way forward. This is the true naivety. We need to be more radical. Pandemics will not be overcome by the benevolence of pharma through voluntary licenses or donations from high-income countries and all the neocolonial bullshit that's wrapped up in that. But it will be overcome by the movement that reimagines a world that places life before profit, health before wealth, and transparency, which is key, before corruption. While we are becoming more and more disillusioned by our broken trade policies, we must use this moment to constantly reinforce what can be. We must provide stories of a better future, but most importantly, we must provide the roadmaps to a better future. We have to restore the hope. So let me give you an example of a reimagined world for how we incentivize research and development of medical technologies. Imagine a world where countries come together to support truly innovative research through cash prizes, essentially removing monopolies from our healthcare, but still ensuring a reasonable profit for researchers and industry. Imagine a world where medical research is collaborative, it's mission-orientated and not siloed. Imagine a world where children in Zimbabwe or Malaysia or Bolivia are given the same novel treatment children in Ireland or Germany are given. Imagine a world where we can prioritize more research into antimicrobial resistant TB than combating baldness in men. This could be a reality, but we have to do the hard work and we have to be radical. Of course, on this journey, there are loads of low-hanging fruits, all these little wins we can win along the way, and I'm more than happy to talk about them later. But radical change must be our ultimate goal constantly, because if we truly want to leave no one behind, if we truly want to achieve universal health coverage, we have to be honest about our current economic structure, about our current trade policies. We can either continue to work within a system that is racist and not only encourages, but celebrates greed, or we can avoid the death of health multilateralism and the continued needless death of millions of people every year. So let me conclude. Our world is simultaneously burning and drowning. We need to restore hope. We need to give the world a roadmap out of this dystopian future. It's not inevitable. We need to stop getting so bogged down with the bureaucracy of broken systems, which leads to filibustering and stalemate in our way out of global crises. We need to be more radical. We need to change our legacy from extraction, greed, corruption, and leaving the poorest behind to one of true global solidarity. And finally, yesterday was the time for radical reformation, because quite literally, the health of our planet and the people on it depend on it. Thank you.
Robbie, thank you so much. Yeah, I can see this. There are definitely people clapping in the background, and I'd echo that. Just some, actually, there's just so much in there. I want to kind of allow the conversation to move on very quickly to Dr. Mike. But just also to say congratulations on the arrival of your niece and your nephew. I think you have to be already. They're very lucky to have you as an uncle. You're already in the running. I can expect you to be getting your best uncle ever t-shirt for Christmas. So congratulations on that. I think you've raised so many useful, important, constructive, and you've really hit the nail on the head on a couple of your points that you made there, especially your point around about it's people who tend to challenge these issues or try and raise these issues tend to be fobbed off a little bit. Well, it's very complex. You don't really understand. That's not how the world works. I think we're seeing visibly daily how the world works. We're seeing the results of how that world is working right now, and it's not good. It's really not good. So, but Mike, can I hand over to you, please, and invite you, if you want to come back on any or all of the points that Robbie has raised there and add some additional points, including or maybe some counterpoints, but equally just kind of to pick up on some of the suggestions and the constructive ways forward that we could see coming out of this, or equally pointing to examples of where you have seen good practice and where there is already examples of change that is giving, restoring, that we could build on, that will restore the hope that Robbie has pointed to, that maybe we're in short supply of at the moment. Over to you, Mike.
Hi, can you hear me? Great. Yeah, I know I'm sitting back here and in awe, shock and awe with Robbie's intervention, and what a voice, what a representative of the real issues. So congratulations, Robbie. You just hit so many nails on the head there in your intervention. I'd nearly offer my time up for Robbie to keep going, because and I think the thing I think the thing I take away from Robbie's intervention is, yes, there's a lot of small things we can do, incremental things. We all do. Everyone on this call is doing that. We're all trying to put the duct tape and the band-aids on the systems as we see them. We're trying to save lives. We're trying to reduce inequality. We're trying to mitigate the impacts of social injustice, health injustice, climate injustice. And in a sense, sometimes we all feel like we're just nibbling around the edges of a mountainous problem. But we shouldn't be disheartened. We have to keep doing that. Our primary drive in life is to help people, to show solidarity, to bear witness, and to do what we can. But we also are responsible to come back to the center and say, okay, we're doing that, but what's really broken is not this. What's really broken is something much more fundamental at the center of our society. And you used the word, Robbie, I think civilization. Very hard to think of it as a civilization in the context of the definition of what that means. But in that sense, living on a fragile planet with a hugely disrupted ecosystem, with a terribly unjust system in every walk of life. It's not just in health. Health becomes the victim of the other injustices. I mean, most of the mortality in COVID was related to unmet medical need for the last 20 or 30 years. People with unmanaged hypertension, unmanaged diabetes, people living without access to healthcare. It wasn't just access to vaccines or drugs. It was, in some senses, the death toll of COVID was baked into our system even before the virus emerged. And we need to address that. Robbie mentioned the concepts of resilience. I think you mentioned it as well, Anne, here in your introduction. I mean, there is that point in disaster management, and we've seen this in natural disasters. We have this idea historically that when a disaster occurs, all the help comes from outside and all the people in the nice shiny suits all arrive and they save lots of people. In most disasters, the majority of people that are helped or saved or assisted are helped, saved and assisted by their own community. And in that sense, we have the whole, we have the narrative, and we have the sort of the emergency response plans as a top-down, outside-in intervention. We have to build resilience. We're through the looking glass now on climate change. Climate change isn't going to happen in the 2030s. It's here, and the impacts of climate change are here. We're losing the pastoral way of life. Look across the Sahel, the Horn of Africa. Robbie, I was in Pakistan 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I've been at this game for 30 years, and I simply could not believe it. I simply could not believe the ocean. It wasn't flooding. It was a new inland ocean. You couldn't even call it a lake. But the fact was 33 million people affected, 7 million or more completely and fully displaced, 7,000 villages cut off, 700,000 women giving birth in the next 6 months without any access to any form of safe delivery. I could go on with the metrics, but that's not normal. And the one thing that came across to me from my Pakistani colleagues and the NGOs and others in the area was the shock. People are used to the Indus rising. They're used to the rains coming down out of the mountains. They're used to these yearly crises. This is not a country immune to crisis, but it was the scale, the absolute overwhelming scale, just completely floored everyone. When I was going to the area, one NGO friend of mine said, "Mike, seeing is believing." In other words, wait till you see this. And it really struck me. And then I, go to Uganda last week, and we see the emergence of a new outbreak of Ebola, and we still struggle with access to the countermeasures that we need to be able to deal with that. So we have 30 countries with cholera, active cholera. Cholera is the single most sensitive disease to climate change. We've never had as much cholera. We've had to now, within the international coordinating group mechanism with MSF, UNICEF, Gavi and others, we're now gone back to using 1 dose of cholera vaccine because we can't give 2 doses anymore. We need to give 1 dose to try and reduce the mortality in these outbreaks. If we look at Haiti, all the way across to Syria, and so many other countries in which we have huge outbreaks of cholera. So these horsemen of the apocalypse have intertwined. They've intertwined the conflict, the governance and fragility, the epidemic, climate, and all of that is ultimately come together in a very, very destructive cycle. But ultimately at the center of that, and coming back to Robbie's point, at the center of that are choices made by human civilization around how we run the planet, how we run economies, how we share resources, how we collectively deal with those threats. And I think you can't get away. We can deal with all the individual threats, but it does come back to the way in which we run our societies and the way in which we prepare for the future together or not, and the models we use for that way of life. And it is a way of life we have on this planet, and that way of life is now lives and livelihoods are threatened in a way they never have been before. And I think about Mia and Evan and my own kids and others, and I think about the world that we're bequeathing to them, and I don't feel very proud. Because a number of years ago, you're still young, Robbie, you can still say you lot, but I'm now looking back over the last few decades thinking, you know, at the beginning of that process, for me, I was saying we can change the world. And I'm now beginning to look back thinking, my God, we didn't change very much, did we? And it's worse now than it was before. So I think there is a need, if we're going to avoid this critical collapse in our way of life, there has to be a completely new way of looking at how we deal with health, how we deal with social justice, how we deal with climate, how we deal with all of these things. But as you said, most people feel totally disempowered when it comes to that because other people know what's best. And I think we have to get rid of that. I think we have to go back to the idea, actually, ordinary people know best. And we need a movement. We need a much broader movement of people to be able to bring that message to politicians and others. Because at the end of the day, leaders will follow what people say, what people want. And, you know, when was the last, is this an election issue in any country in the world? No, I mean, everyone's worried about energy prices. Everyone's worried about house prices. Everyone's worried about different things. They're ultimately related to some of the things that are fundamentally wrong, but we don't make the fundamental things the issue. It's the consequence. So the issues that become politically sensitive are the consequence management of all the things. We don't ever fundamentally get to that. When we talk about agreements on intellectual property, and I had colleagues of mine, I'll call them that, say to me, well, you know, Mike, it's very complicated, and, you know, and I said, you know, not this time, and, you know, I said, well, if a global pandemic that's sweeping around the world, killing millions of people, does not trigger a waiver of TRIPS, then what the hell will? Tell me the crisis that's going to do that. We have these things written into the system, but they never get triggered. They never get triggered. So I'm in awe. You did mention the issues on pharma and others, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't like to paint all of pharma. There are many, many good people who work in the pharma industry, many good researchers and scientists, and everyone wants to go home at night and kiss their nieces and nephews on the head and think, I'm a good person, I did something good today. I don't believe, in a sense, othering the industry and the people who work in it is not, but the principles and the drive of the industry, I completely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. It's venal, it's self-interested, and it is aimed, and the model, you're right, you create scarcity. It's an economic model that's worked for centuries, and then you give whatever your product is to the highest bidder. It's as old as civilization itself. So, but I think though within that, there are companies and there are individuals who want that to change, who really want that to change. The question is, we need to find those allies, but we also need to bring in processes and structures that push industry into working in a much more functional way, in terms of innovation, in terms of production, access, pricing, all of those things. Because I agree with you, monkeypox, the tragedy today with cholera is that we've now gone to that single dose of cholera. We have so little vaccine. So this is not new tech, this is old tech. And we're now scraping to try and provide minimum cholera vaccine supplies to a huge number of countries. We have one vaccine supplier left in the whole world. One vaccine supplier. Imagine, and, so it's not just about the newfangled stuff. It's not just new tech, it's the old tech. Look at oxygen in the pandemic. Oxygen was one of the least available commodities. We just met a colleague who's just back from Liberia, where we've been installing, sustainable, self-sufficient oxygen supplies in Liberia and other places. But you think about all the women who've died in childbirth, all the kids who've died of pneumonia over the last 20 years for the lack of oxygen at a critical time in their care. All COVID did was expose the reality that of the simplest and one of the most life-saving interventions in an acute clinical environment, oxygen, is just simply not available in most countries below that national level. So all of those issues you raise, to me, are really, really resonating with me. And then but the question is, how do we build that movement within civil society? We've been trying to do that through our EpiWin initiative in building this world of faith, world of work, trying to create a connection between our organization and ordinary people and NGOs and civil society, because we work through our member states, and that's one way for us to work. But increasingly, Dr. Tedros, myself and others are saying we need other voices here. We need other voices that are speaking up, speaking out, and have a role and have a platform. And WHO needs to look very seriously at how we create more space for society, for non-governmental organizations within the framework of setting global policy. Now, clearly, the sovereign states of the world have a right and a duty to create global policy, but the voices of ordinary citizens must be heard, and that must be heard all the way down through the system. We cannot continue to set health and climate policy purely on the basis of what politicians in dark rooms are deciding, which we know are being influenced by other factors. So we need that voice. But what we need is that strong functional relationship between civil society and government. And where it does work, and there are good examples where that trust is built and where you can make progress. It's not something we can't do. It's just simply something at the moment we seem not to want to do. So for me, that's the key going forward. We need that movement you talked about. I try to consider myself, Robbie and Ciara, to be an activist, but I'm an activist within a big bureaucratic organization. I sort of live inside the system. I try to do my best from within that system and all of the compromises that brings. And sometimes that's really hard, because I'd like to be you, Robbie. I'd like to be out there on that cliff roaring into the wind, right? And we need more of you. But we also need a few more of the me's inside the system willing to work with people who are in civil society. We need to find those partnerships. The people who are in and have some influence on the system, being able to work with those who are, in a sense, outside that formal system, but have the ideas and the drive and the energy. We need to create more of that collaboration. So if there's anything I take from your intervention, that's what I take from it.
That's great. Thank you very much. And again, a huge amount of stuff in there. But I think I'm just going to leap in on one of the very last points you made there, Mike, around about, the kind of, you're pointing to what for this movement, and in the chat as well, there's an awful lot of endorsement of the points that have been made by both of you, but this need for a functional movement and for more powerful voice. How do you actually structure it? How do you accelerate it is one of the questions, and how do you structure it? You're already pointing to it. We already have the nub of it, the nub of a perfect movement there potentially, in terms of, two activists, one within the system or the part of the system, one extraneously to the system. But there's more of us on the call. There's others of us representing other entities. So it would be great to kind of get your thoughts around about what, maybe if we just looked at it, this is the Irish Global Health Network. Yes, it is an international network, but if we were to just kind of look in terms of, Ireland Inc., Team Ireland, so government, civil society, NGOs, are representatives like yourself, Mike, working within big global institutions. If we're talking about leadership and governance, and setting a good example, Ireland, as we know, is a small country. We're not a heavy hitter financially. We're never going to be the biggest. We're very active, and of course there is that phrase, we punch above our weight in the kind of in the global humanitarian, the development endeavour, but particularly in the humanitarian side of things. So we have an identity way beyond the check or the resources that we bring into it, and we have a huge network of Irish people. So there's a strong people-to-people connection through our concerned colleagues, through our goal colleagues, through all of the NGOs that are active in humanitarian response and in the health sector as well. So I guess, we're not large financially, we're not large in terms of numbers, but we are wealthy. We are healthy, relatively speaking. Robbie, you gave plenty of examples of how our access to health services is much better than others. So we're healthy, we're wealthy. Some might even say we're wise. Of course, that's very subjective. But I'm kind of putting this to you, Mike, in the first instance, and maybe Robbie, if you wanted to come back in on this or other points that Mike made. Sitting where you sit, Mike, and seeing you have that kind of global view, where do you feel that the gaps are and where the opportunities are? Like, what role could Ireland Inc., I'm not talking government, but what role could Ireland Inc. potentially carve out for itself would kind of capitalise on the positive momentum. Going back again to the point that Robbie made earlier, Ireland is not currently, and hopefully never will be, but there's always a question. We're not in that right-wing space or the populist space that we have seen other of our European neighbours move into in recent times. So, there's a need definitely, but are there opportunities or the gaps that maybe we could think of as a network here today and over the coming weeks that we could try and kind of move this idea forward around about creating a functional movement and an effective movement? Thanks.
I agree with all of what you said. I mean, I do think historically, despite all the frustrations maybe that are there, the Irish government has been very close to the NGO and the civil society movement, certainly on the international health front. I know there are still deep injustices in Ireland, within Ireland, on access to healthcare. But and I think Ireland, you said, a punch above weight, a neutral country. And I think Ireland has a very strong voice. Ireland Inc. beyond that, Irish NGOs. When you travel abroad, everyone knows someone from Ireland who's worked. I often find that my voice is listened to, and I often feel part of that is because, being Irish, I don't come with all of that baggage that other colleagues of mine get dragged along, even though they don't want to have it, they have it. So I do think we have, but that brings with opportunity and with ability comes responsibility. So if you have a superpower, a super skill, you need to use it. So there's no point us congratulating ourselves for being so good at what we do if we're not doing it. And I think the issue is there identifying all of those. For example, next year at the UN General Assembly, there's going to be 2 full days of debate. One on universal access to health coverage, and the other on pandemic and health emergency preparedness. It's very rare that you have 2 days of the General Assembly dedicated to those 2 things, with 2 political declarations to be made. And I know declarations, you can probably put them on toilet paper and, but the reality is Ireland's on the Security Council, Ireland is there, Ireland is part of that process. Ireland is a very strong voice right now in New York, and continuing to bring these issues to the table is extremely important. We're currently, the member states of the World Health Organization are currently in the process of agreeing, negotiating a new international treaty or framework convention on health emergency preparedness and response, effectively how we prepare for the next pandemic, and all of the issues that go with that, including the intellectual property issues, access to healthcare issues, supply chains, community-based, all of those issues are on the table right now. But it's a huge smorgasbord of ideas right now. And that negotiating body will come back together in December and start as member states to negotiate what will be included in such a treaty and how strong will that agreement be in terms of being legally binding, in terms of targets, in terms of everything else. Ireland and Ireland Inc. beyond government needs, I believe, to be heavily involved in influencing that process. So, by 2024, we could have a new international treaty around this. Now, I know none of these fix things for communities, but if you don't have that framework in which you've made a global commitment, in which you can hold governments to account, then you've nothing to measure progress by, and you've nothing to hold people to account for. So I think those are the areas in which that movement can work. There are discussions at the moment amongst member states around how best to include civil society and the broader society in the debates at WHO. People have suggested Committee C, a kind of a pre-World Health Assembly meeting where the world's NGOs and CSOs come together to consider what the member states are going to discuss and influence that process. So I think there are concrete areas like that where you can actually come together and say, okay, how are we going to influence the treaty discussions? How are we going to influence the debates next September at the General Assembly? How are we going to push for more inclusion of non-governmental entities, non-government actors in the process of setting global health policy at the World Health Assembly? They're the areas, I think, from my perspective, where a movement at the level of, Ireland Inc., this group, this global health network, each individual organization is obviously involved in its own activism, its own area of work, its own pillars of action, and continue. But I do think we need to identify some higher level objectives for a collective sort of approach to really influence the political discourse over the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's probably what you were calling for, and this whole thing is about today, I think, is about leadership and representation and inclusion. So how are we going to get more leadership from society in the process of global health? How are we going to get more representation in that global process? And how are we going to have more inclusion in that global process? And I think that's something a group like this can look at and say, okay, now how are we going to engage with the Irish government? How are we going to engage with WHO, with others on this and other similar networks in other countries, and to build that up? I think you're right, Robbie, when you said, you know, when someone like you highlights these issues, you're projected as the one who's been the idealist and the naive one. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think the people who got their heads in the sand are actually the ones who think you're the naive one, who think you're the idealist, who think you're the extremist, who's, you know, waving that sort of shroud in front of people, you know, this Cassandra complex. And, you know, I've been called Cassandra before for raising the issues. And it is, though, also at the same time important, and one thing I'll finish on this, is the Mias and the Evans of the world shouldn't grow up afraid.
Yeah.
The price for change should not be the fear in them, that we create that sense of dread in the next generation. I actually think that human ingenuity, human cooperation, we survived for hundreds of thousands of years on this planet by cooperating, by our ingenuity, by our adaptability. We'd have been wiped off this planet a million times over if we didn't have that innate cooperative instinct, that innate ability to innovate, that innate ability to adapt. We've forgotten that. That's our problem, is we've become amnesic to the things that have helped our survival. And it's been replaced with an opioid of greed and self-advancement and achievement and beating the other guy or girl, or, you know, in other words, that instinct has been sort of suppressed, and our minds have been filled with other things. And I think we have to kind of reconnect with that and make it a much more positive thing. This is about cooperating, not for survival, but cooperating for prosperity, cooperating for justice, cooperating to make a better world, and rather than the maybe Robbie presenting that dystopian future where, you know, our kids grow up just basically thinking we're all doomed. I think there's we need, as the adults in the room, to talk about that, because we have to put that on the table, but we also have to find a way not to scare the living daylights out of everyone in society. I find this because sometimes we get to this idea that what we have to do is scare people to create action, and yes, that's fine. But I get more depressed when I think about our kids having to kind of constantly face the idea that they've been told that we're doomed. Mm-hmm. So how do we change that narrative into a more positive movement that is focused on delivering cooperation and innovation and solidarity, that is seen as a positive thing, not purely as a sort of a fight against the inevitable doom?
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mike, for bringing that up and kind of really emphasizing the importance of community in resilience and survival. And like, that's what we are here today. Irish Global Health Network. It's a community, and I think you've given us like a real rallying cry. And I think what you've said has addressed kind of a lot of what's coming through in the chat. Like, what can we do today? How can we speed up this process? How can we counter, you know, the big forces and big industry, and, you know, what can we do? So I don't know if Robbie, if you want to kind of come in there and kind of add maybe to what Mike has said about that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. I could listen to you all day. To be honest with you, I think all of us can. Look, I know it's very hard to feed into doom, but it's very hard not to turn into the news cycle. Every news cycle use the word unprecedented. You know, it's just like it just never-ending cycle. So, but hopefully that is kind of a catalyst. But so this is why I'm saying reimagining a future, one that is of global solidarity, that actually dystopian future is not inevitable if we do the right thing, if we do come together. To kind of go to the original point, what we can do here in Ireland and in groups around the world is constantly create that space that we can get the average layperson to talk about the issue, that actually pandemic preparedness is important to them. Yes, energy crisis. Yes, everything is. Well, pandemic preparedness is. So I want to give a bit of plug to the Access to Medicine speaker tour that we're doing in November, all around Ireland with the help of Oxfam, Irish Global Health Network Student Outreach Team, Union Students of Ireland. So it's this collaboration in Access to Medicines Ireland where there's 3 speakers, including myself, Mirza Pontillo from Costa Rica and Dr. Fernando Sangali from Kenya, where we're going around to talk about the issues. Are we prepared for the next pandemic? But also, we're going to tell them about the pragmatic things that we can do, what the Irish government can do. And then once we motivate the hell out of every student or person in the universities, not just students, we're going to bring them to the Dáil on December 1st, World AIDS Day, and tell them that Ireland's part in the pandemic treaty negotiations, they should have a really strong voice where equity, human rights, and global solidarity is at the heart of these negotiations, where civil society is at the heart of these negotiations. And what we want to tell TDs is, this is an issue that we are all putting a spotlight on, and you have to do your job for our future and the future of our children and the future of our world. So we constantly have to make the space where we are telling our politicians, actually, this is important to us, because there's this old like adage in the activism world, every one time we lobby, Pharma would lobby 1,000 times. So we have to be stronger. We constantly have to get in the limelight. But the thing is, big transformational change normally happens during shocks, big shocks. That's when you really get things that change. Like COVID-19, we're seeing big changes. But I don't want to say we're 2 pandemics away from huge reformational change in the access to medicines or intellectual property regime. We have to do the work now. But also we have to lay the groundwork right now for this transformational change. So we always have to think of really interesting, novel and creative ways to talk constantly to our policymakers in Ireland. They might fob it off as an EU competency, completely forgetting that they're part of the EU and a big leader in the EU. But we have to be really pragmatic about what they can do in Ireland, what they can do at EU, and what they can do in the Security Council. So I do think that's up to us as leaders in the global movement to bring the layperson along. And people think intellectual property is so complex that they won't understand. There's nothing complex about saying we want the world to be more equal. And that our values are that we should fight to find a model that we incentivize research and development. We get all these new novel drugs, but it's available to everyone. That's not complex. And leaders, we give the technical assistance to how that can happen. So there's so much we can do. We need to use our voices, and we need our brilliant activists on the inside, like Dr. Mike Ryan too. So it's a collaboration, but we should not work siloed like we're doing our science at the moment. We should all work together a lot more.
Thanks a million, Robbie. I'm really looking forward to that speaker tour as well. Can I just maybe quickly bring in someone from the audience? I see Ciara, you'd asked an interesting question in the chat. Would you be happy to ask your question to Mike or Robbie? It'll have to be a quick one. Okay, I might just ask her question. Ciara was asking, how can we put the voices of global citizens, like the detainees we heard about yesterday, on the policy table and influence their and strengthen their role and their influence of kind of ordinary people who might be suffering in terms of global policies. I don't know if Mike or Robbie want to come in.
I think you know, one of the things we've been trying to do at WHO, for example, if you think about the pre-treaty negotiation, for the first time in any instrument at WHO, we had open sessions where movements around the world could submit videos, make written submissions. That never happened. What generally happens, and Robbie, you may have a wry smile on this, but my impression very often is that we've moved from excluding civil society and communities to including them, but as a little decoration on the Christmas tree, right? So we build a tree and we make everything nice. And then we go to civil society and say, what do you think? And most people in civil society say, well, I wouldn't have started there. You know, this is fundamentally wrong. And then they say, well, no, it's gone too far now. So you can make a few little comments around the edge. I think the first thing we need to do is when we're setting global policy and we're putting global instruments in place, we need to bring society in at the very, very beginning in these processes. So that because that's where the influence is. Once something has a direction and a momentum, it's very hard to turn that beast around. So I think, first of all, getting earlier consultation, earlier influence in these processes. from non-government actors is absolutely key. But creating the forum where that's a meaningful dialogue, not just a kind of a tick the box. Did we consult with civil society? Tick, yes, we did it. We had a 4-minute webinar and a lot of them sent us nasty messages in the chat. So we shut that down and moved on, right? I'm giving you the inside perspective of how civil society is sometimes seen in big organizations, right? As an afterthought. And therefore it's seen as an issue of marketing or branding. Oh, we have to brand this in a way that it's like getting one of those those fair trade things you get on your coffee, and they say it's stamped with fair trade, and you're really wondering, is that for real? Does that mean it's actually sustainably farmed, financed, and everything? It's the same thing. So I think there's a lot of work to do upstream to get that consultation. You mentioned before, Ciara, the issue. I think so. The idea of how do you create fora for people within civil society as well, where people can just talk these things through. There isn't enough of that. People don't feel empowered to speak on these subjects. Think, oh, there's experts that do that. So how the stuff you're doing, Robbie, going around and getting up on the soapbox in local communities and engaging with people and building that up. But it's focusing all of that energy then back from that community dialogue. How does that get focused? Because you can create a kind of an uproar, you can create a noise at community level. You can go out there and generate that debate, but then how do you focus that energy after you create it on actually getting real change? And that's where the people like you all in the health network are so important, because you're standing there able to kind of amplify and focus those concerns into government. The ordinary individual has no sense of how to do that. So you're almost translators, interpreters, amplifiers of that. And I think that's what doesn't happen systematically enough. That's left to individuals like Robbie to go on the road and different groups to bring different convenings together. But I don't see that necessarily coalescing in a focused way that actually moves the political dial. It's there and it creates a news for a news cycle, and someone goes out and changes themselves to a fence at the dial, and it gets a 1 second thing, or we've seen it recently with the Monet paintings with the climate activists, or people sticking their hands to windows, and all of that's fine. That's individuals just really screaming, just crying out for change, but in the end it doesn't really affect anything, because it just moves on. The world moves on in these interminable, I wouldn't even say it's a 24-hour news cycle anymore. I think it's an 8-hour news cycle. So how do you sustain that effort? And I think the only way you can do that is if groups like yourselves are sustaining that dialogue and then translating that into the pressure that's needed to make change. Without changing that, and this is the thing, that's maintaining the fidelity of the community's voice. And that's very hard for activists, because sometimes, and I've seen it, and I'll be very direct and blunt, communities are manipulated by pharma. Yes, communities are manipulated by politicians, that's true. But communities can also be manipulated by the people who self-elect to represent them. So it's a very solemn role to be able to not use the community to be the activist, but to be a high fidelity translator and amplifier of what the community are actually saying. And that's a very solemn task, and that requires a lot of skill and a lot of honesty and transparency, because I've seen bad examples, and if you're going to populist countries, Robbie, where the voice of the community is manipulated, it becomes propaganda, and propaganda exists on all sides of the equation, and ultimately communities are let down by that, where their voices are manipulated, and where their thoughts and what people are saying, this is what the people think. That's what politicians say to us all the time, and you say that's not what the people think. But if on the other side of the equation, we're manipulating what the people think in order to achieve our goals, then it becomes a zero-sum game. So that to me is a challenge. How do we do that? Maintain the authenticity and the fidelity of the community's voice in this, while representing them as activists, representing them as NGOs. Because that's a challenge, because very often the politician could turn around and say, you don't represent the civil society, I represent the ordinary people, not you, And I think that's something I've found, in a way, political systems can undermine the activist, undermine the non-government actor by actually separating their role that they have for civil society in general. Sorry for going on about that, but that's something I perceive.
Mike, I really feel like the conversation has actually only just started. I think we're really, it's an awful pity we've gone way over time. I know that the conveners are madly hoping that we could wrap this up, but at the same time, we all really want to stay on and continue this conversation. Can I just very quickly then, and apologies, we didn't get to anywhere near the level of questions that we were hoping to invite in from the audience, but we've seen them, we've taken note of them. We really do hope that we'll be able to continue this conversation. I know we still have the day ahead of us, so all of the inspiration and the motivation and the ideas and the radical thinking that has been proposed, make some noise. I think we have started to make some noise, and hopefully we can continue to usefully make that noise and focus it and come out with something very good. And we look forward to working with everyone here on the call again in the future. And a huge and very heartfelt thank you to both our fantastic speakers. We're very, very grateful, and sorry we have to cut this now. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks so much.
Lovely to be with you.
Mike and Robbie.